Every idea you've ever abandoned was already alive. It had a pulse, a trajectory, a future, and you killed it by checking too early. The Hermetic Principle of Gender is one of the oldest mental models in recorded philosophy, and it has almost nothing to do with biological sex. It describes the mechanics of how anything gets created: a business, a relationship, a work of art, a version of yourself. Two forces have to combine, and if you misunderstand the timing, everything collapses before it starts. You felt this. You've had a vision so clear it almost vibrated. Then a week passed. The energy faded. You told yourself it was a bad idea, but the idea was fine. Your patience wasn't. The Kybalion, the text that codified these Hermetic principles in the early 20th century, uses the word gender to describe something broader than masculine and feminine. It means generative polarity. Every act of creation requires two phases: the impulse that plants the seed and the silent period that lets it grow. One is active, the other is receptive. Skip either one and you get nothing. Think of the active phase as the moment of conception. A thought arrives with force. You see the business you want to build. You feel the book you want to write. You sense the person you're becoming. That flash carries energy, raw, directional, loaded with intention. The Hermetic tradition calls this the masculine principle, the initiating spark, but a spark in open air just burns out. The second phase is gestation. The idea has to land somewhere protected and be left alone long enough to develop structure. Roots before leaves, foundation before walls. The Hermetic tradition calls this the receptive or feminine principle, the mental womb where a concept gains weight, complexity, and readiness. And this is where almost everyone fails, because gestation feels like nothing is happening. You plant a seed in soil and the surface looks dead for weeks. Below the surface, roots are threading through the dark, pulling nutrients, anchoring. The visible part, the sprout, the leaf, the flower, comes last. If you dig up the seed on day 3 to check whether it's working, you destroy the process. You've done this with goals. You've done this with commitments. You announced the diet on Monday and abandoned it by Thursday because the mirror hadn't changed yet. The principle operates at every scale. A songwriter sits with a melody for months before the lyrics arrive. An entrepreneur holds a market insight for a full year before the timing aligns. A scientist carries a hypothesis through hundreds of failed experiments, and each failure is gestation, the idea refining itself against reality. The seed was planted once. The growth happened in silence. So why do we keep ripping seeds out of the ground? Modern culture has an obsession with immediacy that runs directly against this principle. We want the result the same day we want the result. Social media compresses timelines until anything that takes longer than a week feels broken. You post the launch announcement before you've built the product. You visualize the outcome so aggressively that visualization replaces action. The masculine principle, the impulse, the spark, the announcement, gets all the cultural applause. The feminine principle, the quiet, unglamorous middle, gets treated like failure. There's a specific trap here that's worth naming. When you plant a mental seed and then immediately start doubting it, you're applying a second masculine impulse to something that needs receptive space. You're trying to reinitiate a process that already initiated. Doubt in the gestation phase acts like digging up the seed every morning. Each inspection resets the clock. The idea never gets deep enough to survive on its own. This maps onto something researchers in psychology have studied for decades. Goal pursuit follows a pattern. High motivation at the start, a dip in the middle where progress feels invisible, and a surge near the end when the finish line appears. That middle dip is gestation. The people who push through it treat the dip as information. The process is working, it just hasn't surfaced yet. The people who quit treat the dip as evidence that the seed was bad. Consider how this plays out in creative work. A novelist writes a first draft, and it reads like garbage, every single time. The first draft is the seed, raw, misshapen, full of wrong turns. The revision process is gestation. The book finds its real shape in the second draft, the third, the fifth. Writers who quit after the first draft because it didn't match their vision are pulling the seed out of the ground. They had the spark. They refused the wait. The same mechanic drives relationships. Two people meet and feel an intense connection. That's the seed, the initiating energy. What follows is a long, sometimes uncomfortable process of learning each other's rhythms, tolerating imperfection, building trust through small, repeated actions. The couples who survive are the ones who let the early spark gestate into something with roots, the ones who chase the spark itself, who want the intensity of the first meeting to sustain indefinitely, burn through relationship after relationship, always planting, never growing. There's a physical analogy that makes this visceral. Pregnancy lasts 9 months. No amount of urgency compresses that timeline. You can prepare the nursery faster. You can read every book in a weekend. But the biological process has its own clock, and your impatience is irrelevant to it. Mental creation works the same way. Certain ideas need 6 months. Others need 3 years. The timeline belongs to the idea, and your job during gestation is to protect the environment. Keep the soil warm. Keep the doubts from digging. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of this principle is that the gestation phase requires active passivity. You're doing something by holding space. You're contributing by refusing to interfere. This feels wrong to anyone raised in a productivity culture where value equals visible output. Sitting with an unfinished idea, carrying it without forcing it, letting it develop on its own schedule. That's labor. Invisible labor. But labor. The Hermetic texts describe this as the union of will and imagination. Will plants the seed. Imagination holds the space. When will operates alone, you get frantic action without direction. The entrepreneur who launches 7 businesses in a year and finishes none. When imagination operates alone, you get beautiful daydreams that never touch reality. The person with a journal full of plans and an empty portfolio. Creation requires both, in sequence, with patience between them. There's a practical test you can run on your own patterns. Think about the last 5 projects or goals you abandoned. How many of them did you abandon during the invisible middle? After the excitement faded, but before any real result appeared? If the answer is most of them, you have a gestation problem. The seeds were fine, you kept pulling them up. Now think about the 1 or 2 things in your life that actually worked. A skill you built, a relationship that lasted, a project that shipped. Trace the timeline. There was a spark, a moment you decided, then there was a long stretch where it felt like nothing. Maybe you almost quit. Maybe you complained about the lack of progress. But something kept you in the soil. And then, one day, something broke the surface. The growth became visible. People called it overnight success. You knew it had been underground for months. The Hermetic Principle of Gender suggests that this pattern isn't accidental. It's structural. It's how creation works at every level. Physical, mental, emotional, the seed and the soil. The impulse and the patience, the flash and the dark. Critics might argue this framework is too mystical, too detached from practical strategy. And there's a fair point buried in that objection. Intention alone grows nothing if the conditions are wrong. A seed in concrete won't sprout regardless of patience. The principle assumes you've chosen fertile ground, the right market, the right relationship, the right skill for your actual strengths. Gestation without discernment is just stubbornness. But when the ground is right and the seed is real, the single greatest threat to creation is the gardener who won't stop digging. Most people have no shortage of sparks. Inspiration visits constantly. In the shower, on a walk, at 3 in the morning when the idea feels so clear it practically glows. The masculine principle is abundant. Seeds are everywhere. The scarce resource is the willingness to go dark. To carry something without showing it. To trust a process that offers no proof it's working, until suddenly, unmistakably it is. You already know which seeds you've buried. The question is whether you'll leave them in the ground long enough to find out what they become.